Okay, I want to thank everyone for attending this evening. My name is Marco Rosero Rossi. I am the Executive Director for Washingtonians for Public Banking. We're an organization that supports public banking throughout Washington State, and we're very excited to have Senator Patty Kuderer present with us today. This is part of our virtual town hall series, which we are going to be having throughout the year on a bi-monthly basis. So every 2 months, we will be having events where we will invite speakers to talk about public banking or related issues. So be on the lookout for that. You can visit our website, and I'll be putting it in the chat right here if you aren't aware of it already, for more information, including looking at our pet events page for upcoming events, because we have a lot of great speakers lined up throughout the year, in addition to Senator Patty Kuderer. I'm especially very excited because we have a very good turnout. We had a lot of people register this, most people registered for any of our events. So it's exciting to see there's so much interest in this issue, especially as we gear up for the legislative session. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, which is State Senator Patty Kuderer. State Senator Kuderer was first appointed to the House of Representatives in September of 2015 and won her first election to retain the seat the following year. In January 2017, Senator Kuderer was unanimously appointed by the King County Council to fill the vacant Senate seat in the 40th Legislative District, becoming the first female senator to hold the seat. Senator Kuderer is currently the chair of the Senate Housing Committee, as well as being a member of the Law and Justice Committee, State Government Elections, and Rules Committee. I want to note, just for our own sake, Washington's for Public Banking is a nonprofit 501c3. So while we invite Senator Kuderer to speak and to inform us about the upcoming bill, SB 555, I want to just have a disclaimer that nothing in this is an endorsement for any future campaigns or any campaigns that she's currently running. So without further ado, I do want to welcome our speaker, Senator Patty Kuderer. After she talks, there will be time for questions and answers at the end of her discussion. So thank you, Patty Kuderer.
Thank you, Marco, and good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you and to talk about something that you're passionate about, that I'm also very passionate about, the idea of a public bank for Washington State. Now, you probably already know the history, but I think it's important sometimes to think about it a little bit, because the idea of a public bank here in Washington has been around for over a decade in various forms. In fact, my colleague, Senator Hasegawa, had been leading the effort from the very beginning. And, you know, his idea was to pattern a bank here in Washington identical to the one that is set up in North Dakota, the only public bank that currently exists in the country. But as I got into it more and more, I had some questions about how that worked with our Constitution, and there was concern about the bank, the way it was structured in his legislation, that it would increase the state's debt limit, which we weren't allowed to do. So that sent us back to the drawing board. And in 2017, we had a workforce, a task force that I was privileged to sit on to look at, you know, as I put it during the beginning meeting, I wasn't there to talk about whether we create a public bank. I was there to talk about how we create a public bank. And it really did change the tone of the task force. And out of that came some ideas, and we also got, you know, the beginnings of a business plan in order to put a public bank together. Since that time, I've introduced a few bills. They have always been rigorously opposed by the big banks, and they've changed over the years and became really something other than what we wanted it to be. So this last year, the bill that was introduced last year has been the latest iteration in a long line, like I said, that comes from the lessons learned and working with constitutional experts so that we don't run afoul of our Constitution, and others in the banking industry, including Bill Longbreak. For those of you who don't know him, he's been in the banking business for a very long time, very smart man, and is very supportive of this effort. But we had decided on the best model for
one of our goals coming up, that we need to put the glue on.
that we decided that the best form for the state of Washington would be a cooperative bank. It was modeled after the National Cooperative Bank that's out in Washington, D.C. And the idea was we were listening to what was happening out in Congress too, and they're talking about creating a national infrastructure bank. And the idea of this bank is that it would be devoted to infrastructure because, as we know, infrastructure is the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, there's always going to be a pothole to fill. There's always going to be a bridge to repair. There's always going to be a school to build. There's always going to be this, that, and the other thing in terms of infrastructure. And there's always going to be a need for financing. But instead of, trying to do appropriations for all these financing, we wanted to look at a smarter way of using the taxpayer dollars to benefit the taxpayers and invest in the infrastructure of the state of Washington. So like I said, we came up with a cooperative bank model that would allow for cities, local governments, the tribes, any quasi-public entity that exists that has a dedicated tax revenue stream or a tax base to become a member of the bank and to enjoy the benefits of that bank, which would include interest on their deposits that they were to put in, and also the ability to have ready access to capital. This would be especially crucial in times like 2009 when we saw the recession hit. And the banks during recessions, as you know, they don't like to lend money, but a public bank could do that because the public bank isn't going to exist to create profits for the bank. The public bank is going to exist to invest in communities and to make sure that the tax dollars are working at their highest and best use for the taxpayers. So it's a fundamentally different philosophy about how to run the bank. We're still running into headwinds on it. So we ended up putting in a provision, and this was something that I feel very passionate about, and it's modeled after the National Cooperative Bank again, which is the goal of 35% of the lending of the bank would go for financing the building of affordable housing. And I think that that's really critical because we're in a housing crunch right now in our state. We're going to need about 1.1 million more homes in the next 20 years to meet the needs. The current need, we're already about 250,000 down, but we're going to need it to meet the needs of people who are moving to the state and what we expect the increase in population will be during that time. And we're not going to build these overnight. So we need to have a financing institution in place that local governments can, like I said, get ready access to capital so they're not trying to cobble together funds to compete with developers when land becomes available. And this is really important because we already exempt, if a private seller sells to a local government, they don't have to pay the real estate excise tax on that sale. So that's more money in the seller's pocket. There's an incentive, a built-in incentive to sell to the government. This last year, I was privileged to take a housing tour to Singapore and Hong Kong. And interestingly, Singapore has a 90% home ownership rate. Hong Kong is not far behind. They do the same thing differently, but there were three things that I noticed that they did that were the same. The first is that the governments themselves own the real estate in a lot of these cases, and they own the real estate to take that cost out of the construction equation for the developer, for the private developer, which lowers the costs right out of the gate. The second thing they do is they have a public infrastructure bank that funds these developments. And so the financing is, whatever they want to make it to make the project work. And the last thing is they each make profit. They make money for the tax, I guess in their case, it'd be for the government off of every step of the process. And the way I look at it is that if that component was built into these kinds of transactions, it would be money that we're making for the taxpayer to put back into our communities. So I'm very encouraged by that. I've had conversations with the chair of the committee where the bank bill is currently in. And I'm going to be frank with you, there are some concerns that that this is not going to do all that we want it to do. And so we're working with the treasurer, and I'm working with the chair of the committee, and I'm working with DFI the Department of Financial Institutions to see how we can get to that point of win for the taxpayers, especially. So that's kind of where we're at. You know, the public bank is it will be the first public bank. If we're able to create it, it'll be the first one in over 100 years. And so it's a really big, it'll be a monumental thing. It'll make national news if we're able to do this. That's not why we're doing it, though. We know that we need to shore up our fiscal foundation. We know that we need to strengthen local government's ability to compete with private developers and have an application on file with this bank where they can access money when they need it in order to purchase property, in order to build the kinds of affordable housing that all of our communities across the state desperately need. So that's, you know, that's kind of where it's at in terms of it moving this session. We're working hard to see what we can do to get a striker together to see if we can get it heard, but we are in a short session and time is running out. But I do have a very strong partner in this, Senator Liz Lovelet, who has been instrumental in helping us move the bill forward in the past, and is more than willing to take up the mantle should it not get over the finish line this session, and pursue it until we are able to get this set up so that we have this asset for the taxpayers and for the citizens of the state of Washington. With that, Marco, I'm certainly happy to take any questions if you have any, but I really appreciate the time to present to everyone and talk about the public bank.
Thank you, Senator Kuderer. So I'll invite anyone to ask a question of the senator about the character of the bill and its potential progress. I want to propose the two ways to do it. Some people can raise their hand. I'll do my best to call on people on first come, first serve basis. You can also make a note in the chat. If you write stack, I'll see that you're on top of the stack. I'm demonstrating this. And then I will call on you there. So I'll pay attention to the hands raised and the stack. So I have Alice Green and then Catherine.
Hello. I'm wondering, could public pensions or local city governments invest pensions in this type of bank?
As it's currently written, the answer to that is no. And that was, there was absolutely no interest in including that for a lot of different reasons. But one is that if there, you know, when you create a bank, there is a possibility that the bank could fail. I mean, we are taking all sorts of safeguards to make sure that this bank would not fail, given that we would be able to recoup any kind of default on a loan, because you're going to have just entities that have a tax base or a dedicated revenue stream. But we don't want to be in that situation. And the idea of including pensions really drew a lot of opposition. And we have enough opposition on this bill, quite frankly. We don't need to invite more. And the idea too, I think what's really important here is to understand that we can actually start small and grow the bank over time. So demonstrate its viability, demonstrate its usefulness, and then grow it over time and add things to it. Right now, as it stands, I mean, we have a student loan program through the state that really isn't funded, isn't really used. But honestly, if it were to secure an appropriation and invest in the bank, it could also, student loans could go out through that bank. So as it's written right now, that isn't something that a lot of people have focused on. I don't know if they actually know that that's even a possibility, but because of the way that the term member is defined, it would include the student loans. So something like that could be captured, but we're going to stay away from pensions.
And then next I have, oh, I'm sorry, Alice, did you have a quick?
So you actually addressed my next question, which was going to be student loans. And Sorry.
All right.
My other question would be, would this be just mainly infrastructure to start with, or would there be personal memberships as well?
Yeah, we can't do personal memberships because our Constitution prohibits lending to individuals. This was one of the problems with the original version of the bill, because it did allow for individuals to be members. It was set up like the Bank of North Dakota. But you know, the Bank of North Dakota, that public bank is really the state of North Dakota doing business as the Bank of North Dakota. So it's really the state doing that, and their constitution does not prohibit direct lending to their citizens. So during the Depression, for example, they had lent to the farmers in North Dakota. They were able, as a legislature, to suspend the mortgage payments. So the farmers didn't have to pay their mortgages during the time of the Depression. And they lent them money to buy seed so they could actually plant. North Dakota had the fewest bread lines because they were and they recovered faster because they had that public bank at the time. And then when the economy picked up again, then they gave the farmers you know, a reasonable repayment plan, which they can do, right? It's banking with a heart, essentially, right? And to this day, they have the largest number of family farms per capita of any state. And that's why. And, you know, but we don't have the ability to do it. It would take a constitutional change for us, because there is actually a prohibition in our Constitution of doing that. Unless we can give money if they're indigent. And that's why we can do things like Office of Civil Legal Aid and that sort of thing. But other than that, we can't.
Next I have is Catherine.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Although your answer just made me think of one more. We are able to, or you are able to change our constitution, right? It
Well,
can be.
you know, I think, you know, let me start with that real quick. To amend the Constitution, because I'm actually on a bill right now to amend the Constitution with Senator Kaiser. It is to add the right to an abortion and contraception in our state. But it requires 2/3 of each chamber to vote for it. We do not have supermajorities in either chamber right now. But even if we were able to pass a constitutional amendment that changed our Constitution, it would go immediately on referendum to the citizens, and they would have to vote for it as well. So that's how our process works. We have an initiative process, but our initiative process does not allow us to amend the Constitution by initiative. So it has to start in the legislature. And the only way that we're going to see a change like that is if we have 2/3 in both chambers that are supportive of the idea.
So my question to you though is, I don't know if you know, but I work with a group called Whole Washington, and we're working to create a Washington State Health Trust. And so we're very interested. I would think that a public bank would be a great place for the funds to fund that from our tax dollars. That would be a great place for that to go. So I guess I'd kind of like to know if that's possible. And second, I'd like to know, what can we do as an organization to help get this through across the line?
A great question. I would say that I don't know the answer to whether or not Whole Washington could deposit money in the bank. It wouldn't be a.
It wouldn't be Whole Washington.
Yeah, under
the Washington Health Trust would, but I just want to know what we as an organization could do to help get this bill passed, and would we be able to put the taxes collected to pay for all of our health care in a public bank?
Yeah, and that my inclination to that is no, but I would want to look at it more closely. It's the first time that has come up, but again, that would be like an individual deposit, and we're not going to be taking individual deposits from people, just cooperative members, which would be local governments and quasi legislative governments. So that's that. In terms of what you can do to help though, I'm assuming that your members reside all over the state. And I think what's really important is not just to reach out to your legislators and tell them you support this idea and you want to see a public bank created because you know it will help the taxpayers of the state, but also to talk to your local governments, because they're the ones who are going to be the members of the bank, right? And the more local governments that I've talked to about this, the more they see the value in having something like this, especially when they need money quickly, especially when there's a downturn in the economy. And they also like the idea just that their money is not, it's not going to be used by, mega banks making billions every year to make more billions for those banks, but actually whatever is generated is actually the profit, if you will, the interest that's paid on deposits goes back into the communities, into their communities, and they would share in any of the profits as a member of the co-op bank. One of the things we've been talking about with the National Cooperative Bank is hoping to have this bank, once it's created, be a member of the National Cooperative Bank, so that could be a source of lending that we could access if we were a member of that bank as well. So that's what you can do, and we're happy to come and speak with your city council members and your county council members, your PUDs, anyone that's on a like I said, a border commission that has a dedicated revenue stream or a tax base. We can talk to them about the benefits of having a public bank that they would benefit from with their tax dollars. Their tax dollars will go farther with a public bank. I think there's just no question about it.
So I guess I'm just a little bit confused. They would accept deposits from municipal agencies that collect taxes, but they wouldn't accept state level taxes. It wouldn't accept those deposits.
You mean well, that would be a state appropriation. Yes, the state could appropriate money into the bank. But here's the kicker. So the state could be a member, and the state could put money in, but the state can't borrow and incur debt. And that's because it would be counted against our debt limit. And that's not something.
Borrow, but it can still use those funds to do the business.
If they could pull their own deposits out, but they could put money in, almost like seed money. The state could appropriate money, put that money in. They would have to pull it out, and then they would have to appropriate the money for the healthcare is what they would have to do. It couldn't come directly from the bank, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay.
And I want to keep it moving because we have quite a few people who've jumped on the list now. So next I have the list is Alice.
Hi, Alice.
Oh, I'm sorry. We already got you, Alice. Sorry. It's Hannah is next. Hannah, you had a question about the number of the bill? Did you
Oh,
put
I
in
just
chat?
wanted to know what the bill number was so I could
Okay.
look it up.
Sure. It's SB 5509.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then I have Breck.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I joined a little bit late. I may have missed your answer. How is this similar or different to the post office bank run by the government in New Zealand, for example, and other countries?
Well, I don't know how it's run in New Zealand, but it's really interesting. We used to have postal banks back in the day, and it's similar. It is similar as to how a postal bank would work. And we looked at that model, but like I said, we went with, but a postal bank would allow for individuals to participate. We can't allow individuals because of our Constitution.
Thank you.
Yes, you bet.
Next I have is Malcolm.
Yeah, so I apologize if this is too basic of a question, but I'm kind of struggling to understand the advantages of this as a financial tool compared to others. Like, what is the advantage of using this to fund infrastructure rather than municipal bonds or whatever else? And then in line with that is the idea that it would accept lower returns than private banks and therefore could do socially beneficial causes, or like what are the specific different advantages for how this would fund things? I guess, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It actually would have lower administrative overhead, and that would be the point of it, the main point of it in terms of the lending costs and things like that. So that would lower the interest rate on loans for cities and county governments. It's another tool in the toolbox. It's not going to replace the banking system by any stretch of the imagination. It's not going to be the sole source for a municipality or a county government, because it's not going to have retail services. It's not going to do paychecks and things like that. It's going to be dedicated to infrastructure. Another benefit that it will have is that cities could have an application on file with the bank and pre-qualify for a lending amount and have that ready access to capital. Like I said, during a recession, when banks have typically decide they're not going to lend, this bank absolutely could lend during depressed economic times, because the state could also come in and do an appropriation. But they will have a tax base either way, and they will be able to access funds in order to keep people working or do their, infrastructure also means jobs. And, and when you do have jobs, especially, people working during a recession, as you all know, you come out of it faster. So those are the main reasons that we would like to have the public bank. And I do think that there are cities that just say, we want our tax dollars working for the highest and best use for the taxpayer. Maybe not all of the tax dollars that they have, but they certainly could put in whatever they think is appropriate, and they could benefit from that. I know smaller cities in particular were thinking about pooling resources. The bank could also, here's another thing that is a benefit of the bank, is that it could partner with the Housing Trust Fund. The Housing Finance Commission, and with community banks that have a limit on what they can do in their communities in terms of lending. The public bank could come in as a partner and increase the amount of lending in order to do a larger infrastructure project in a community that otherwise would have to go to a larger bank that would charge more interest, more overhead, etc. So those are the main reasons for it. And like I said, it's another tool in the toolbox. It's certainly not by any means the only thing that will be available. We also have the Public Works assistance account for local governments, for those of you who are familiar with that. The problem with that is that, again, it's limited by how much it can lend, which this bank wouldn't be. And it also, because it's not set up as a trust, the legislature can sweep the funds when they need to or feel they need to. And that has happened. There have been some of us who find that, that shouldn't happen, and we object, but we get overruled and the accounts get swept and the money gets into the operating budget to balance the books. We have the distinction, thanks to Tim Eyman, of being the only state in the country that has to balance its budget out 4 years rather than every 2 years. And so that is one of the reasons why the Public Works Assistance account gets swept. And that money then cannot be used for the infrastructure projects in local communities. Have the bank would be able to help out with that. I hope I answered your question.
You did, and I have just one really quick follow-up. I'm wondering what the implications would be for local governments where like the political situation is that they're extremely anti-tax, and so this could be an alternative way to fund public spending for them. But then also from that perspective, would it be a situation, I'm assuming with the interest of the solvency of it in mind, that there would be situations where you say, no, we can't lend to you because the math doesn't add up?
Absolutely. If the math doesn't add up, there won't be, they won't get what they're asking for. That's very, very true. I mean, it's a bank. It's going to be run like a bank. Basic accounting principles and banking principles will be in play for the bank. But the idea is that we want, like I said, if we start small, we can grow it over time. And there can be incremental appropriations by the state in order to get it off the ground and get it going in the right direction. So local governments can see the benefit of putting money into it especially when it comes to projects in their communities.
Okay, next I have Ruth. It looks like you put 2 questions in the chat, and then I have Mary, and then you put additional questions in the chat. So I want to make sure I get enough time for everybody. So why don't you ask the first 2 questions you put in chat, and then we'll get to Mary, and then we'll come back to you with the other ones. So Ruth, oh, you're still unmuted. There you go.
I'll just as soon do the third one and skip the first two.
Okay, that's fine.
You want me to read it?
Sure,
Okay.
yes. Go ahead.
What I would like is to understand how this infrastructure bank would actually work. If you could outline that, what it does for a municipality, and it sounds like it's dealing with bonds, and then how the municipality pays them the I guess the money they get from the bonds to say pay for building a contract to build low-income housing. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what's the model that's being used to get more money to the municipality so they can use all these infrastructure building. Is that clear? Clear is because I don't understand exactly from the bill. I'm not really good at legal terms.
Yeah, no worries, and thank you, Ruth. And the bill doesn't get into that kind of detail. And if I understood what you were saying is you want to know how, what kind of services or how the bank will function essentially. It will function like a traditional bank, and it will have the financial services available to cities, not retail, but from an infrastructure standpoint, lending, bonds, things like that. It will be under the auspices, or I should say, the oversight of the treasurer. And when we first started with the bill, we had a treasurer who was very hostile to the idea of a public bank. And so we tried to put it at the Housing Finance Commission, which does a lot of this work already and has the structure in place for lending and that sort of thing. But that also got a lot of pushback. In fact, the banks that work with the Housing Finance Commission pretty much gave them an ultimatum that if you support the bill, we're going to pull out and not support the work that you do. And that's not something that they could do, because the idea wasn't that we were replacing the banks that they were working with. The idea is that we would be another tool in the toolbox, like I said. So that kind of killed that idea. But then we got, through the magic of elections, we got a treasurer who supports the idea of a public bank. And so now it's housed where it should be, which is under the treasurer for oversight. So that's where, in terms of the services, like I said, there'll be audits and all of that go along with the bank. I'm not a banker, I'm a lawyer. And I've not even sued a bank, so I can't even tell you, how that necessarily works that way. All I know is that people who are deeply involved in banking were integral in setting up the provisions of the bill. But it still has work. We still need to do work on it to make sure that it isn't just, a revolving loan account. That's not what we want. We don't need to have another revolving loan account. We want to be able to have a bank that provides more of the services that a bank traditionally provides, that benefits the local community members, so that are members and their taxpayer base. So I hope that answered your question.
Next, I have Mary, but before we have Mary ask her question, just for those who don't know, I know a lot of these terms get some used to being comfortable with. So could you just explain to people what's a revolving loan account and why this would be different? Just for
that's a good question. Thank you. That's when it's $1 in, $1 back with a little interest, and you can't lend the same dollar out. And the way that banks lend the same dollar out is they lend the money out, and then somebody else puts it in another bank, and that bank lends the same money out, and that money gets put in another bank, and that money gets lent out again. So that's how the same dollar gets lent out like 10 times over and over, I think is what the average is. We'd have to have more public banks, but we're looking at a way of being able to make this a more robust system so that it can mimic using the same dollar out, but it has to be capitalized in order to, I mean, the capitalization, the math has to add up, as what one person said earlier, I think it was Malcolm. The math has to add up, and you can't lend out more than you have to have a certain number of reserves and things like that. So again, I'm not a banker, and I'm not in the weeds like that with this. I leave that to people who are. But the goal, I can tell you what the goal of the bank is, and that is so that it provides a similar type of banking experience for cities, for their and counties and other quasi public entities for their infrastructure needs. So whatever those services are and how we can best and highest use of the taxpayer dollar, that's what we're trying to achieve with this public bank.
Okay, next person I have is Mary.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for taking my question. I'm very interested in this, very excited by this, been interested in public banking for many years. And I'm encouraged that it's coming back to Washington State. That is, that there's a bill. My question is actually kind of a follow-up to Malcolm's, I guess. And that is like, what are the advantages to having a public bank? And I'd like to know if this is correct. One of the advantages is that there's some control over what the Public Bank of Washington would then invest any of the funds it's holding in. Like for now, State of Washington banks with Bank of America. For now, City of Seattle banks with Wells Fargo, and they don't have any options. So whatever Wells Fargo chooses to invest in, it might be fossil fuels, it might be private prison management companies, and other things that progressives like myself deplore. We would have, that is, through the board of the public bank, there would be more control over what gets invested. And I'm not saying that, only progressives favor a public bank. I mean, it's for everybody. It's certainly bipartisan, and it's meant to benefit all communities. But the basic principle of there being some control over what the funds get invested in, if they do get invested at all. Am I right about that, Senator Kuderer?
Absolutely. You are absolutely right about that. There would be way more control over that. And the board is, who sits on the board is set out in the bill. So, and it does include like the treasurer and obviously
No.
county members and city members, will be on the board as well. So yeah, absolutely. The citizens can weigh in terms of where they want that money invested. And of course, you do want it invested to make as much as you can, but you want to be investing responsibly. Like I said, the idea of the bank is that it's a bank for the people. And right now we have a banking system that is driven by greed and profit. And that's, those are the rules. I didn't make them, but that's really what it's all about. This is going to be a different kind of bank. It would be run like North Dakota, the North Dakota Bank, but it would be structured differently.
Thanks very much.
And in the chat, I saw that Alice had a question that seemed to be almost piggyback on Mary's question about the board's oversight and organization. Alice, did you want to ask your question?
Just wondering about a board of trustees. You said that there would be oversight by the treasurer, but then also I assume there would be some type of board. Would that be made up of municipalities or individuals? How would that work?
Yeah, there's a board that's set out in the bill, and I don't have the bill in front of me. I apologize, but I can get that information for you if you would like. But it's set out in the bill, and that's what the experts, the banking experts recommended in terms of how to set up the board.
Okay, and then next, and we also have Catherine, who also had a question that she put in the chat.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering, because North Dakota doesn't seem like a really liberal state at all. So,
It's not.
why do you think that our current Republican representatives and senators would not support a public bank?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I can tell you that I've spoken with folks in North Dakota about their bank. And they said that if they were creating a bank today, it would never fly. That their legislature would never, ever, ever agree to do this. When it was created in North Dakota, it was during a progressive movement, a populist movement. If you remember, in 1919, somewhere around there. They were very frank about the fact that they will never give it up because of how it's become, part of how they conduct their business. They run every tax dollar through their bank, but they would not be able to get it set up today. But they've also agreed to severe limits on the bank. Like the bank is one physical building. There are no ATMs. So even though you can be an individual depositor in that bank, you can't go, it's not convenient. You got to drive to Bismarck, to use an ATM. I mean, it's like that. And they did that at the behest of the banking system, right? The big banks. And so they're bucking a tide there, but they would not be able to get it set. I think for my Republican colleagues, it's hard for me to explain why they don't see the value in something like this. Because I can tell you that a lot of their small cities, even one in Senator Schessler's district, Rosalia, I spoke to the mayor and some council members there. They're very supportive of this idea. They know that it would help them fix their infrastructure problems. So the smaller cities in particular would benefit from this banking structure. But, again, I mean, I think if all of you talk with your local city council and county council members to look at this seriously and have an open mind about it, and especially those in Eastern Washington, they can be the ones to convince the legislators to take a more serious look at this approach, this idea of creating a public infrastructure bank for the state of Washington. And like I said, if the feds get their act together and they are able to pass a national infrastructure bank, if we have one already in place, even if it's small, we're going to be set up and ready to do business with that bank as well.
I just want to point out there's no other person who's made a indication that they wanted to ask a question either in the chat or raising their hand. So I just want to have the floor open and allow a minute for if anyone else wants to do it. Oh, Malcolm indicated you want to ask a follow-up question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so in line with that, that's the last part about the small municipalities is part of what I was wondering. I could imagine institutional Republican politicians wanting access to a revenue stream they might not be able to get politically through passing higher taxes or whatever else. But so I'm curious if there's more than that to it. But the other thing is, since this doesn't require a constitutional amendment, it doesn't actually require any Republicans to support it in the legislature unless I'm missing something. And maybe this is not something you want to discuss, but I'm curious from the perspective of what sort of donor constituencies, et cetera, oppose this. It seems like the housing part, I could kind of understand why private banks would not want to have this happen because it's a sort of competition maybe. For from the infrastructure perspective, it seems like it just wouldn't affect them at all unless I'm missing something. So part of that is I'm wondering how much opposition is there in the Washington State Democratic Party to this? Because I suspect that is significant as well.
Yeah, there is, we're divided on this idea. There's no doubt about it. And unfortunately, the ones who are not open to the idea sit on Ways and Means. So you can figure out who they might be. But that we are gaining support within the Democratic caucus. Each year it's grown. When we first started the bank, the public bank caucus back in 2017, there were 4 of us at the table. And now we're at 18, 19, I think. So we're getting to critical mass. We don't need very many more, but you know, my thought is that, yeah, this shouldn't necessarily have to be a partisan bill. I mean, there are some, reproductive health, gun safety, those are always, it seems to me, going to be partisan bills. But this one seems like it helps rural Washington a lot, this bill would. The public bank would. And it seems to me that their representatives and their senators should be supporting this. So my sense is that you cast a broad net when you're advocating for this bill, because you never know. I mean, right now I've got a very huge bill that's addressing the issue of pharmacy benefit managers. And the number 2 co-sponsor on the bill is Senator Shelley Short from one of the most conservative Republican districts in the state. So these, you can come to an agreement on these. And there are times when you do have what appears to be a real controversial bill that turns out to be bipartisan. So that's why I say from what I would hope your work would entail is not just dealing with Democrats, but it would also be reaching out to Republicans as well.
Again, thank you. The floor is open. We have a few minutes left if anyone wants to take the time to ask another question. I'm just going to leave it open if there's any final questions to make sure everyone is heard.
Resist the urge. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
All right. And then we have
Oh,
Mary
there's
with
a
her hand
question.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I can't resist the urge. But my question is about the public schools as infrastructure. Because I'm sorry, I came in about 15 minutes late, so you may already have said this, but included in the definition of infrastructure is our public schools, and I know we're always struggling to pay for public education. So I wonder, could you say a few words about how this bank could help the public school system?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question because our public schools are funded through the actual physical plant of a public school is funded through the capital budget, not through the operating budget. That is what funds the actual teaching, the actual education curriculum, if you will. It funds additional services, teachers and para-educators and folks who help our DD community members in school. Special ed comes out of operating budget. So it's the state's responsibility. It's our paramount duty to fund education. And there is a lawsuit, I think, right now that is trying to say that the capital piece of that is also a part of education. And I think it's, I can't remember if that actually came down or not now, but there is an issue as to whether or not the actual infrastructure is part of the constitutional educational requirement. I apologize if that decision's already been made and I'm not aware of it. I don't sit on education, so haven't really been following that too much, but I know that there was a case out there like that. So typically it'd be funded by the state. If it's not, if the case says, if the Supreme Court decides, nope, capital funding is not part of the constitutional primary, duty to fund education, then the bank could come into play and work with school districts, lending them, doing a bond to build schools, remodel schools, that sort of thing. So it definitely could help school districts, assuming that's not going to be the state's obligation. If it's the state's obligation, then we got to pay for it and it wouldn't have to go through a bank.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, well, thank you again. Like I said, we're nearly at time. I'll give one few seconds if anyone has any final questions. It doesn't look like it's the case.
Looks
So-
like Ruth is raising her hand.
Oh, did you? Ruth, did you have?
I was just going to make a comment, actually. I appreciate your effort and your dedication to this stuff. So I definitely want to compliment you and encourage you on this. Having gone through your, the 21 session, 22 sessions, sort of been this battle before, but I wanted to just mention how important that governance is, that oversight is, because even if you have a public bank like North Dakota, the Bank of North Dakota invests heavily in the infrastructure for tracking. So it is important to have guidance and oversight, and so it's not a guarantee that you're going to get what you want with a public bank unless there are not other pieces in the bill that work towards it, even more democratic, more citizen involvement. I know that sounds scary, but other states have done that, and I think to be effective, someone's not public bank.
Well, thank you, Ruth. And just to clarify, Senator Kuderer, you said that you, if I heard you right, you said you couldn't remember what the structure of the was outlined in the bill in terms of the board. Senator Kuderer, oh, looks like you froze up.
Oh, my internet connection is unstable.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't remember exactly the makeup of who what positions or
So,
what
as
categories.
someone asked that question, so it just as I recall, the legislation says there's going to be a 9-person board. 5 of them will be elected by the municipalities, so the members will be elected a majority on it. The other 4 will be appointed by the governor, with 3 out of those 4 having approval by the Senate. And then the last one, which would be the president of the board, is appointed by the governor's discretion. So that's the current, as it's outlined in the current legislation, just so we have some clarity on that.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So without any further questions or comments, I just want to thank Senator Patty Kuderer again for giving us time and answering our questions. If you want to find out more about this legislation, please visit our website. I know there's a lot of people here who already signed up for our weekly newsletters, and that's probably how you found out this event today. But if you're not, please sign up on our website for those weekly newsletters. We'll be giving you updates about this legislation and future events involving public banking throughout Washington State. In addition, we do record all these presentations. So if you know someone who wanted to be here wasn't able to, we will have this on our YouTube channel. So be able to watch it and hear some of the feedback then too. So I want to thank you again, Patty Kuderer, if you have any final comments or.
Thank you. I was kind of jumping the gun there. Apologize for that.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I have an official Facebook page that I post about the bills that I'm working on. And I've posted about public banking before, and I'll probably be doing that again this year. So if you want to take a look at what else I'm working on as well, you'll find a lot of good useful information there.
Great, thank you, thank you. And we are also have a presence on Facebook and on X/Twitter as well, so you can follow us there too.
I'm no longer there.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for having a wonderful evening. This was the best turnout we've had for any of our events. So I'm glad to see there's so much interest in this issue, and I hope to connect with each and every one of you as we see this legislation progress.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Mhm.
Take care.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good night.